The heat hung like an oily, tangible blanket over the square. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and pulverized concrete. They were not official soldiers but militia, moving quickly and predatorily through the ruins of a collapsed state. Pinned behind a crumbling fountain, the witness watched one man, wearing mismatched fatigues, slam a heavy, angular weapon onto a pile of rubble. The machine gun was dark, scarred, and brutally functional. The gunner leaned into the stock, his face a mask of clinical focus. Then, the world vanished into sound. It was not the measured thump, thump, thump of modern slow-cycling weapons. Instead, a violent, high-frequency pup-tur tore the air. It sounded, as one observer noted, exactly like tearing calico. The acrid scent of burnt powder immediately followed. This harsh chemical reminder proved that an artifact of a long-dead empire was violently reanimated. This was the MG-42, a ghost machine traversing modern borders. Its presence in this chaotic contemporary civil war was a testament to its terrifying enduring effectiveness. Even decades after its original production run, it remained a proficient killing engine. Later, customs officials in Vilnius, Lithuania, would discover another one, fully functional, traveling illicitly toward Germany. This weapon was a symbol of global chaos that refused to become a mere historical relic. But to understand why this devastating weapon still mattered, we must travel back to the trenches of the First World War. That was the moment the machine gun became less a tool of defense and more a cage for the infantryman. The heavy, water-cooled Maxim guns of 1914 were anchors. They required vast crews, copious amounts of water, and fixed emplacements, forcing the mobility of the front line to cease. By 1916, German strategists recognized the fatal flaw. The weapons that were supposed to win the war were too cumbersome to move forward and exploit tactical breakthroughs. The Allies began fielding lighter, more portable designs, forcing the German army onto a permanent defensive stance. The defeat of 1918, codified by the punishing Treaty of Versailles, paradoxically accelerated the German Revolution in machine gun design. Forbidden from developing heavy weapons, the clandestine arms bureaus of the Weimar Republic were forced into radical ingenuity. They needed a single weapon that could be light enough for a soldier to carry on the assault. Yet it had to be robust enough to serve as a sustained-fire heavy machine gun on a tripod. It also needed to be versatile enough to function as an anti-aircraft weapon or a tank coaxial gun. This concept, the Einheitsmaschinengewehr, the universal machine gun, became an obsession. It was a vision of tactical flexibility that would allow a small, highly trained unit to deploy the firepower equivalent of 20 riflemen. By the late 1930s, that vision materialized in the MG-34, officially adopted in 1939. It was a masterpiece of precision engineering. It was short recoil, air-cooled, and featured an advanced quick-change barrel system. A trained crew could swap a hot barrel in 10 to 15 seconds. Its all-purpose nature was lauded even by enemies. An American Army intelligence document noted it could be fired without a mount, on a simple bipod, tripod, or special anti-aircraft mounts. But this sophistication came at a steep price. Each MG-34 demanded 150 man-hours of labor and complex machining, making rapid mass production difficult. Its delicate metal parts and fine tolerances required scrupulous cleaning. This forced the machine gunners onto a steep, painful learning curve in environments like the Eastern Front. There, freezing lubricating oils and dirt caused constant stoppages. Even before the MG-34 saw widespread combat, concerns over its cost and reliability surfaced by 1935. The German war machine relentlessly demanded more weapons, cheaper and faster. New designs were constantly commissioned. Adolf Hitler's order in December 1941 for rapid production marked the pivotal shift away from the MG-34's delicate brilliance. The shift was towards something simpler, cheaper, and infinitely more terrifying, the MG-42. Now we return to the front. The wind that scoured the Ukrainian steppe in December 1941 was not merely cold, it was a physical force. It was capable of turning metal brittle and flesh numb within minutes. Machine gunner Klaus, his breath freezing instantly on the wool scarf wrapped around his face, pressed his cheek against the cold steel of the MG-34. The weapon, his supposed masterpiece of German engineering, felt like an anchor forged in ice. A Soviet counterattack was building in the woods ahead. The air was thick with the scent of pine and burning wood, punctuated by the faint, muffled sound of distant artillery. Klaus gripped the pistol grip, his fingers stiff inside his heavy mittens, waiting for the signal to open fire. His assistant, Rudy, knelt beside him, hands hovering over the linked ammunition belt, his eyes fixed on the forest edge. When the flares went up, turning the snowscape into a sickly green, the signal came. Klaus squeezed the trigger. The MG-34 fired a short, rapid burst, a precise, measured tack-tack-tack-tack-tack, and then silence. It was not the click of an empty chamber, but a hard, metallic refusal. The bolt was locked halfway back. "Damn it," Klaus hissed, yanking the cocking handle. It refused to budge. The fine tolerances and complex rotating bolt mechanism that made the MG-34 so versatile in the summer now became its fatal weakness. The specialized lubricating oils, designed for temperate climates, had thickened in the sub-zero temperatures. They had turned into a sticky, useless sludge that seized the delicate moving parts. Rudy immediately fumbled for the small tin of kerosene they carried. This was a lesson painfully learned from captured Soviet manuals. They had been taught that the internal moving parts must be kept clean and dry, oiled only when the gun warmed during firing. But here they were forced to improvise, mixing oil and kerosene to create a temporary frost-proof solvent. Klaus slammed the bipod legs down and rolled the weapon onto its side. His fingers, now exposed to the air, felt like stone as he wrestled with the feed tray cover. The metal was so cold it burned. He could feel the fine dust and ice particles that had worked their way into the receiver, binding the complex mechanism. The 150 man-hours of precision milling that went into every MG-34 had created an instrument too refined for the brutal reality of the Eastern Front. It demanded the clean, sterile environment of a laboratory, not the frozen mud of a trench. While Klaus worked, frantically trying to de-ice the bolt with the indirect heat of a small, sputtering paraffin lamp held cautiously beneath the receiver, the sound of Soviet light machine guns began to chatter, finding their range. The infantry around them returned sporadic rifle fire, but their defensive line was centered entirely on Klaus's weapon. Without the sustained, devastating volume of the universal machine gun, the line was paper-thin. This failure was not isolated. Across the thousands of kilometers of the Eastern Front, reports flooded back to the German procurement office. The MG-34 was a masterpiece, but it was too expensive, too complex, and critically, too slow to manufacture when the Wehrmacht was chewing through men and material at an unsustainable rate. The 150 man-hours required per weapon were a luxury Germany could no longer afford. The turning point came in the highest echelon of the Third Reich. In December 1941, as the German offensive stalled before Moscow and the true cost of the war became evident, Adolf Hitler issued a direct, non-negotiable command: simplify. The demand was for a weapon that was rapidly producible, cheap, and utterly reliable, regardless of the man-hours lost. The response was a radical departure in design philosophy. The engineers tossed aside the costly precision milling and the complex rotating bolt of the MG-34. Instead, they embraced the future of mass production: stamped sheet metal. The new weapon, the MG-42, was designed from the ground up to be a war machine, not a work of art. Where the MG-34 demanded 150 man-hours to complete, the MG-42 required only 75. Manufacturing costs were slashed by nearly 25%. The sophisticated rotating bolt was replaced by a simpler, robust roller-locked mechanism, far more tolerant of dirt and debris. This was the core transition, the shift from the pursuit of engineering perfection to the ruthless pursuit of attrition. The MG-34 was designed to last a decade. The MG-42 was designed to win the next week. It was a weapon born of desperation, a testament to the brutal reality that survival on the Eastern Front now depended not on the elegance of the design, but on the sheer, overwhelming volume of fire. This olivine had to be churned out of a factory and into a freezing foxhole. The final result was a weapon that was cheaper, faster to produce, and which carried within its stamped steel body the terrifying potential for a cyclical rate of fire that would soon define the sound of German dominance. The MG-42 was not engineered. It was forged by necessity. Its development was less a process of refinement and more an act of brutal reduction. Every complex, milled component of the MG-34, the source of its fragile sophistication, was scrutinized, simplified, or replaced entirely by stamped sheet metal. The weapon looked crude compared to its predecessor, its angular lines and welded seams lacking the polished elegance of the MG-34, yet its simplicity was its genius. The roller-locked bolt mechanism, an evolution over the rotating bolt, was faster to manufacture and critically far more forgiving in the field. It shrugged off the grit, sand and freezing mud that had crippled the earlier design. The true revolution, however, lay in its operational tempo. The MG-34 cycled at a respectable rate of 800 to 900 rounds per minute. The MG-42, with its streamlined mechanism and lighter components, achieved an unprecedented rate of fire, pushing 1,200 rounds per minute and sometimes even higher for experimental variants. This speed was not merely an increase in volume, it was a fundamental shift in the weapon's auditory and tactical signature. Private First Class Ray Outlaw, pinned down in the dense foliage of Normandy 2 years later, did not know the technical specifications. He only knew the sound. The month was June 1944. The air was heavy with the damp, earthy smell of the hedgerows and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Outlaw's Rifle Company was attempting to push through a choke point, their advance slowed to a crawl by invisible resistance. They had heard the distinctive, slower thump-thump-thump of the American Browning .30 caliber machine guns. But the sound that stopped their hearts came from the front. It began with a short, almost comical hiccup, as one Captain Alistair Borthwick described it, before the rate of fire accelerated so rapidly the individual shots ceased to be distinguishable. The sound ran together, a single tearing ribbon of noise. It sounded like canvas being ripped violently, or perhaps, more accurately, like a carpenter's power saw biting into hardwood, earning the gun the moniker, the buzzsaw. It was the fast burp of that German gun, a sound so unique and immediate that it instantly identified the enemy and instilled a mounting concern among US troops. Outlaw dropped flat into the mud, the noise vibrating in his chest cavity. The high cyclical rate meant that a half-second burst released at least 10 high-velocity rounds. This was not aimed fire, this was area denial. The stream of bullets was so dense it created a close and dense cone of fire, slashing the air and the ground. He watched a nearby tree trunk erupt in splinters as the continuous fire swept across his position. The sheer physical intensity of the bullet stream, what soldiers called the grim intensity, was devastating. Where a slower machine gun allowed a soldier time to react between rounds, the MG-42 offered none. It was a continuous, frantic torrent that obliterated the space between targets. The psychological impact was profound. The US War Department, recognizing the terror this weapon inflicted, produced Film Bulletin FB number 181 specifically to demythologize the MG-42. Yet the narrator of the training film, trying to reassure the troops, could only acknowledge the fear. "Listen to that," the film voice warned. "Fast. That thing sprays a lot of lead."
"And you're scared," he admitted.
"Because the German gun fires faster than anything you've run into before."
This terrifying speed was the key to the German tactical doctrine.
The Einheitsmaschinengewehr concept mandated that the MG-42 was the core of the infantry squad, providing the firepower equivalent of 20 riflemen. It transformed small German units into force multipliers capable of achieving fire superiority against numerically superior Allied formations. But the MG-42 was designed to be more than just a devastating light machine gun on a bipod. Its true versatility was unlocked by the addition of the 20-kilogram Lafette 34 tripod. On the Eastern Front, Sergeant Major Gunther Richter oversaw the emplacement of his MG-42 team in a reinforced defensive position. The sheer weight of their load, the 11.5-kilogram gun, the 20-kilogram Lafette, spare barrels, and 13-kilogram ammunition cans, was immense. But the Lafette transformed the weapon. It was no longer just a defensive fire support tool, it became a precision instrument. Richter's assistant gunner stabilized the heavy tripod in the prone position. The Lafette incorporated adjustable heights and, crucially, a mechanical searching fire unit. This unit allowed Richter to precisely control the gun's vertical and horizontal traverse, creating a calculated beaten zone that spread destruction over a predetermined area without constant manual adjustment. He clipped the optical sight, the MGZ series, onto the receiver. Through the glass, the distant Soviet positions at the tree line, nearly 3,000 meters away, came into sharp focus. A Lafette, coupled with the optics, extended the MG-42's direct fire range dramatically. Furthermore, the tripod mount turned the light weapon into a medium and heavy machine gun capable of sustained, long-range indirect fire up to 3,500 meters. Richter could now drop plunging fire onto concentrations of enemy troops forming up far beyond the visible horizon, turning the weapon into a form of light artillery. This capability was critical, particularly as the war turned defensive for Germany from late 1941 onward. The MG-42, often emplaced in mutually supporting positions, became the teeth of the West Wall and the fortifications of the Atlantic Wall. On D-Day, the MG-42 proved its ultimate deadly effectiveness. At Widerstands Nest 62, overlooking Omaha Beach, the German defenses were built around this exact principle, interlocking fields of fire, maximizing the MG-42's ability to deliver overwhelming volume. The first American landing craft lowered their ramps, and the German gunners safely protected by concrete. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The MG-42s unleashed appalling, enfilading fire on the landing soldiers. The frenzied buzzing of thousands of rounds cutting through the air tore apart companies in minutes. The sheer density of the bullet stream was impossible to survive on the open sand. Allied troops formed up for an attack, only to be met by the immediate crack of rounds splitting the air and the sight of men dropping dead or wounded before they could even identify the source of the fire. The MG-42 was a weapon built for attrition and utter destruction. It was a devastating killing engine that consumed ammunition nearly 3 times faster than comparable American machine guns, but the results delivered were up to 40% increased compared to its predecessor, the MG-34. Its unique tearing roar and its deadly efficiency cemented its place as the scourge of the Allies. It forced the Allied command to develop entirely new tactics. No infantry advance could be contemplated until overwhelming artillery and mortar support had utterly silenced the terrifying buzzsaw nests. The MG-42 had succeeded in its core objective. It completely redefined the sound and the brutal reality of infantry combat. The silence that finally descended upon the shattered continent in 1945 was not truly silent. It was filled with the echoes of the MG-42's constant roar and the bureaucratic rustle of destruction. As the Allied forces occupied Germany, one of their primary tasks was the systematic elimination of the Nazi war machine. This included the deliberate destruction of the original design documents, the blueprints, and the engineering specifications for weapons like the Einheitsmaschinengewehr. The victors sought to erase the very foundation of the instruments that had caused such devastation. The MG-42, however, refused to be erased from history. Its sheer ubiquity meant hundreds of thousands of units, approximately 400,000 having been produced between 1942 and 1945, were simply scattered across the globe. They fell into the hands of resistance movements, newly formed armies, and opportunistic militias everywhere. Czechoslovakia continued manufacturing the MG-34. Israel, facing existential threats in the late 1940s, acquired over 5,500 of the MG-34s. They turned the weapon of their former persecutors into the instrument of their own defense. Fidel Castro's rebels wielded them in the Cuban Revolution. The Viet Minh captured them from the retreating French forces. The MG-42 had become a weapon without a master, a stateless engine of firepower available to anyone willing to pull the trigger. A decade after the war, a new political reality demanded the weapon's return to its homeland. With the formation of the West German Bundeswehr in 1955, there was an immediate and pressing need for a standard, reliable infantry machine gun. The engineers faced a unique, humiliating challenge. The original plans were gone. They were forced into an intensive program of reverse engineering. They meticulously disassembled and measured captured or recovered MG-42s to reconstruct the weapon's design blueprint. This painful process resulted in the MG-1, a faithful reproduction of the wartime design, ready to equip the new German army. But military technology does not stand still, and the demands of a unified alliance soon dictated the next evolution. North Atlantic Treaty Organization standardization efforts mandated a shift away from the German 7.92mm Mauser round. The MG-1 had to be recalibrated to fire the new standard 7.62mm NATO cartridge. This conversion, drawing on the experience of wartime designs known as the MG-2, culminated in the definitive post-war iteration, the MG-3. Adopted in 1963, The MG-3 was the ultimate expression of the Einheitsmaschinengewehr concept, now adapted for the Cold War. It featured a heavier bolt than the MG-1 to manage the pressure of the 7.62mm round. It also incorporated an adapted belt feed mechanism for the US M13 disintegrating link belt and a chromium-lined bore for enhanced longevity. Rheinmetall produced it until 1979, and Heckler & Koch then took over licensed manufacture, ensuring the design's continuity. The MG-3's lineage, including the commercial variant known as the MG-42/59, began a global conquest. Yugoslavia's M53 was a direct copy. Italy's Beretta produced the Fucili Mitragliator. Austria developed the MG-74. Nations from Norway and Denmark to Turkey, Greece, Pakistan, and Chile adopted the design, recognizing that the core principles of rapid fire and streamlined production remained unmatched. Decades later, in the dust and heat of Afghanistan, the MG-3 found itself pitted against the demands of 21st-century warfare. It proved that the brutal simplicity born of 1942 was still superior in critical ways. Lieutenant Colonel Detlef Rausch, of the German Infantry School, stood watching his troops on a forward operating base in the year 2010. The air was thick and dry, tasting of fine sand. His troops were armed with the newest generation of infantry weapons, including the lightweight, high-mobility 5.56mm rifles and machine guns like the MG-4. But arrayed beside them, looking almost dated with its classic wooden furniture, was the MG-3. Rausch had read the reports and seen the evidence clearly. The new 5.56mm ammunition was lighter, easier to carry, and excellent for close-quarters fighting. However, the operational reality of Afghanistan engaging targets in open, mountainous terrain exposed a critical flaw. Rausch noted that the ammunition documentation on their side was quite high. He added that the effectiveness of their weapons, especially at ranges exceeding 200 meters and against targets in defilade, simply did not meet their expectations. The new lighter rounds simply lacked the punch and stability to reliably engage the enemy at distance. The Taliban, often operating from 300 meters or more, were proving resilient to the smaller caliber. Rausch watched as a machine gunner, a young soldier named Klaus, prepared his MG-3. Klaus was checking the chromium-lined bore, the heavy bolt gleaming under the harsh sun. The MG-3, still cycling at a blistering 700 to 1300 rounds per minute, delivered the heavy 7.62mm round with a muzzle velocity that ensured impact and penetration far exceeding the lighter caliber. A call came over the radio. Targets sighted on a ridgeline, approximately 450 meters out. Klaus dropped prone, adjusting the bipod legs quickly. He settled his eye behind the iron sight, the weapon feeling solid and heavy against his shoulder. He knew the drill. The 5.56mm guns would suppress the close targets. The MG-3 was the long-range equalizer. He squeezed the trigger. The sound was not the tearing calico of the MG-42's wartime peak, but a controlled, deep, guttural roar. This was the sound of mass and velocity meeting air resistance. The heavy ball and armor-piercing rounds, mixed in the belt, delivered the truly appalling bite that the original design promised. Rausch watched the dust kick up precisely where Klaus intended. The enemy movement on the ridgeline ceased instantly. Rausch summarized later that reports from the theater indicate the target effectiveness of 5.56mm standard rounds at ranges exceeding 300 meters is insufficient. He confirmed that troops in theater use the 7.62mm MG-3 machine gun to engage enemy targets at ranges greater than 300 meters. 70 years after its conception, the Einheitsmaschinengewehr concept was vindicated once more. The MG-3, the direct descendant of the MG-42, was not a relic of history but a vital, effective component of modern firepower. It proved that the need to reach out to targets at and beyond 300 meters still required the weight and velocity of the 7.62mm round. The design, intended for the rapid attrition of World War II, had become the essential instrument for precision engagement in the wars of the 21st century, a lasting testament to its profound and enduring legacy. The MG-42 refused the fate of a mere museum piece. While its original blueprints burned in the fires of 1945, its design principles had already become the intellectual property of global conflict, The reverse-engineered MG-1 and its subsequent NATO-standardized variant, the MG-3, ensured the weapon's institutional survival. It served the Bundeswehr and its allies for over 7 decades. The brilliance of its stamped steel construction and roller-locked mechanism resonated far beyond Germany. It became the foundational DNA for seminal post-war firearms, the Spanish CTETMI rifle, and, critically, the Heckler and Koch G3, one of the most widely adopted battle rifles in history, were direct descendants. Their operation depended entirely on the principles pioneered by the MG-42. This enduring quality meant the Einheitsmaschinengewehr concept was never truly decommissioned. It merely decentralized. It became a weapon without borders, traversing the global arms trade in a chaotic second life. Thousands of license-produced M53 machine guns, Yugoslavia's faithful MG-42 copy, were unleashed during the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Israel and Syria bought Czech-made MG-34s. The Italian Navy fitted a variant to ship guardrails. Pakistan and Turkey manufactured the MG-3 under license. The weapon's journey often became illicit, a ghost weapon moving through the dark currents of global chaos. It was a testament to its robust engineering that a fully functional MG-42, produced in the mid-1940s, could still be discovered by customs officials in Vilnius, Lithuania. It was en route to illicit markets in Germany, a machine refusing to surrender its active role. This was the weapon that surfaced in the shattered square of a collapsed state. Its presence was a stark, violent reminder that the most efficient killing engine of the Second World War remained utterly relevant. The militia gunner, his face slick with sweat and dust, leaned into the stock of the MG-42. The heat was a suffocating layer in the alleyway. The gun itself was cold, its metal surfaces radiating a density that defied the surrounding temperature. The witness, pinned behind the crumbling fountain, felt the tension coil in the air. A silence fell, broken only by the distant, ragged cough of an internal combustion engine. They had heard the sound before. It was an ominous, high-frequency note instantly distinguishable from the slower, more labored thump-thump of modern, gas-operated weapons. Now the gunner shifted his weight. His finger tightened on the trigger. The world dissolved into the sound. It was the terrifying pup-tur, the high-speed burp that smeared the air, sounding like a vast sheet of canvas being violently torn in half. The cyclic rate, easily pushing 1,200 rounds per minute, meant the weapon achieved immediate fire superiority. The noise was not merely loud, it was physically painful, a shockwave that slammed against the eardrums. The muzzle flash, dazzling even in the midday sun, was followed instantly by a cloud of fine, choking dust kicked up from the ground. The air immediately filled with the harsh, acrid smell of burnt cordite, a chemical signature of instantaneous, overwhelming violence. The gunner held the burst for a full second, perhaps a second and a half. The weapon bucked and shuddered against his shoulder with an aggressive recoil and shake. The massive Lafette tripod was absent. This was pure infantry fire, delivered with raw, focused strength. In that brief, devastating moment, between 20 and 30 high-velocity rounds were delivered into the target area. The sound stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving a ringing silence that was heavy, expectant, and utterly terrifying. The witness could only hear the lingering echoes. The dust settled slowly in the hot air. There was the faint, sickening sound of human collapse from the direction of the target. The MG-42 delivered not just death, but psychological annihilation. The grim intensity of the bullet stream, the fact that a half-second burst delivered enough lead to obliterate an entire line of men, instilled a hushed respect that transcended language and culture. The machine gunner, without emotion, reached down and quickly pulled the belt out of the feed tray, checking the remaining ammunition. His action was clinical, practiced, and utterly detached. He had used a weapon designed for total war in the 1940s to solve a localized contemporary problem of attrition and area denial. The complexity of modern infantry combat had been summarily dismissed by the brutal, enduring simplicity of the MG-42. The MG-42, the ultimate expression of the Einheitsmaschinengewehr, was not merely a weapon of its time, it was a foundational piece of engineering that transcended its Nazi origins. Its design principles underpin post-war military doctrine, and its physical presence continues to shape global conflicts. From the steel mills of the Third Reich to the dusty, lawless alleyways of a collapsed state, the buzzsaw's terrifying sound proves its legacy is not history, but continuous active warfare. If you value these historical accounts, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us preserve these stories. And please, share your own memories or thoughts in the comments below.